Hello everyone, it is Thursday. Yes, we're back on Thursday. So we're back to our normal time. That's pretty good. So those of you that joined us on Monday, welcome back. It's only been a few days. So hopefully you might actually even remember the image we're going to start with. For those of you that haven't been online before, so we've got the next hour. We're going to go through Capture One version 20. I'm going to cover the version in a second. We've got 4 or 5 images we'll try and get through today, which are the images that you guys have sent in. And we'll edit them as best we can and talk about some of the issues with some of them, some of the ways to fix some of those issues, and actually today we're probably going to cover some where we can't fix all issues. Unfortunately, software is not a magic wand. So first of all, hello everyone all over the place. What have we got? Spain, Bruce is back on from Missoula. You're on time today. Claudio's on again. Alan's still on from Australia. Alan, I'm sorry we keep keeping you up in the middle of the night. We've got Mexico, we've got Germany, we've got Boston, we've got all these different places. So cool, let's get started. So the version I mentioned before, we are using Capture One version 20. So it's actually 20.1. So you'll see a lot of confusing things out there. So it's version 20 is the Capture One version we're using today. The actual version number is 20.1.3. But if you go to your About page in Capture One, it's actually going to say 13.1.3.9 to really confuse things. That's the specific build number we're using today. So 13.1.3 came out last week. For those of you that are using version 20/13, it's a marketing thing more than anything. Please make sure you're using the most up-to-date version, which is the 0.1.3 release. The 3 release actually had some new cameras installed into it, so some of the Nikon series cameras, some new lenses, but it also fixes a lot of the bugs. So in general terms, although last week on Monday, we were talking about beta software and be very careful, these point releases are really important because they keep your software stable and they fix some of the issues that some of you have been finding every now and then. Okay, so with that version in place, so that's the version that we're using today. For those of you that don't have version 13/20, if you're subscribing, it's a free update, so you can go to captureone.com and download it. If you're not subscribing, then it's no issue. You can actually you can subscribe if you want to, or more importantly, you can buy the perpetual license is what I was going to get to. So some people prefer to own their software, or own as much as you can. If you do, then you can get the perpetual license and then pay for updates as it goes. If you don't have either, then have a look at the upgrade paths, or go to captureone.com and download a free trial because they give it away for free for 30 days with no restrictions, so why not give it a try. Right, let's go into Capture One and the image that we left last week. It wasn't, it was Monday. Okay, we are also going to talk about next week because we've got a bit of a change in schedule again for next week, just to really confuse people. Okay, so a couple of things in. JD's on as well. Hey, JD, and Bo from Sweden, cool. Yes, we got Ray's just said hello from Denver. Pablo's just said, can you show us some of the ones that you took last week? I will do. Maybe not today. Maybe I might post them up actually on the Facebook group. But yeah, actually, we can have a look at it. Maybe in a future session we'll actually edit one of the shots that I took around the sunrise stuff last week. That's not a bad idea. But I'd rather focus on your stuff. So let's get into some of these images. Okay, so this one is Earl's image. Classic waterfall shot, long exposure. It's pretty sharp. I mean, we're at f8, it's pretty sharp. ISO 400. It's an interesting one in my head because if it's ISO 400 and you've got a 5.3 second exposure, it depends what you're trying to do. But what that says to me is I could have done ISO 100 and gone for a 20-second exposure and had even more exposure time. It's completely up to you. It's an artistic choice. But if I was ever looking at long exposures, something clicks in my head that says if I'm at a higher ISO than even the base ISO, which may even be 50 in some cases, why? Is there a reason why I'm shooting at a higher speed when maybe I don't necessarily need to? So to me, this one has an ND filter over the front of it in order to allow for that. We could have actually gone for even longer on the exposure, or even scale back the ND a little bit if we moved it to ISO 100. So that's the first thing that sort of screams to me as a question in my head. It's not anything wrong. It's not a bad choice. It's just I'm wondering whether or not we could have got even more motion if we just switched it down, stopped it down to ISO 100. That said, we've got a lot of motion in this shot, so we've got all the water stuff here, and we've got these nice leaves in here. These are nice and crisp. It's similar in feel to a shot we did not too long ago, but let's see how we do this one slightly differently. So what we want to do, let's think about the key things of this image. So we want to keep these leaves as sharp as possible. So this area here was clearly the subject. And we want to make sure that we can see all these strands of water and all the waterfall detail coming down. What we don't want to do is try and sharpen this stuff out the back, because it's thrown out of focus. So at f8, this would tell me this is actually quite a small space to have that completely out of focus in the back. But if we start trying to over sharpen the image, what's going to happen? Let's have a look. So if I put clarity and structure up, so we've got a bit of sharpness coming back now in those leaves. But let's just have a look down here at what that's done to this area. And I'm being unfair, I'm zoomed in quite a lot, but it's just gone over the top. And we've lost that nice effect, and it gets too much. So we've just got to bear in mind we've got a couple of different things that are going on here, and we need to balance them out. So we want to get some extra sharpness and structure into the water. We don't want to touch this down here, and actually we want to leave this out here out of focus. So really simple thing. First off, let's check our lens profile. So it's loaded in the lens profile this was shot in. That's great. If it hadn't done, we would have chosen either the generic one or tried to find the lens that matched. Of course, if you don't find your lens has loaded in and it says manufacturer profile, great. That just means the camera has told Capture One information about the lens, so Capture One can make some decisions on it. Failing all of that, stick with generic. If your lens isn't listed or it doesn't have the manufacturer profile, either way, stick with generic. It's going to give you the best result. Okay, Earl's just answered my question. There we are. So yes, there's no filter, and I like the water with around a 5-second exposure. So yeah, hence my so the sort of question I have. So if the target was 5 seconds, then to me, then that's when you start playing with either aperture or ISO. If it was just a case of we're just getting as long as we can, then the lower ISO, the better in general. But in this case, wants a 5-second exposure, and these are the settings that got those 5 seconds. So we don't have much, and I've checked it in this, we don't have much need for diffraction correction in here. There's no purple fringing, which is great, so we don't need to dial in any of those. Typically, you're going to find that in really high contrast, sharp lines, and in this case, we don't really have them. So let's go to the exposure tab. So we do this quite frequently. So lens first, always do your lens corrections first. I can't drum that in enough. Then typically, you're going to spend most of your time in Capture One in this tab, which is the exposure tab. So in our exposure tab, all I'm focusing on at the moment is what I want to do with the water. So almost discount the rest of it. Let's just focus on texture in the water. So number one way of isolating the water is to mask it. So we're going to create a new layer. I'm going to call this layer water. So just double click on the layer name and just type it in correctly. Double click on the layer name and you can rename it. And I'm just going to draw a really rough mask. I'm going to have it at 100%, so 100% opacity, 100% flow, because I want this binary. I want it all on. Soft edges, so it blends into the rest of it. And with that done, we're just going to draw a line along here. If your mask doesn't show up when you're drawing, like this, it's because you don't have the mask turned on. So you can turn it on a few ways. Number one, you can press the M button on your keyboard. Number two, you can go into here, and you can choose to either always display the mask, which gives you the shortcut there, M to turn it on, M to turn it off, show a grayscale mask, which is quite funky because we can do Alt or Option M on a Mac or Alt M on a PC, and that allows us to see just the mask, so it doesn't show anything as an overlay, the red overlay that you're used to seeing. It literally just shows you the mask in grayscale, which can be useful if you want to get rid of distractions. So if ever you're drawing a mask and you don't see it, press the M key on your keyboard and you'll see it pop up. Right, I'm just going to draw in to this water stuff here. I'm not too fussed if I go over 1 or 2 leaves, but we don't want to go too far across anything that's not part of the water. Let's just make my brush smaller to do that up there. Making your brush smaller, quick reminder everyone, so right click on the image, you can change your brush settings, or the square brackets, so the right hand square bracket makes the brush bigger, left hand square bracket makes the brush smaller. So there's my mask. Now I want to get rid of the mask to be able to make some decisions in how we edit it, so press the M button again. With this, we can then, I mentioned earlier, we want to get some structure in there, right? Well, structure is typically in the clarity area. So we've got our clarity slider and we've got our structure slider. Bear in mind, and we talked about this quite a lot before, structure itself has a positive effect. It certainly helps with things like getting texture out. So let me just do a quick, let's do a before and after so you can see. So there's without structure, there's with structure. There's a bit of clarity in there as well, of course, but if we just focus on what structure is doing, we're getting some of those strands in detail. But structure is looking for texture and edges. What that means is at high ISOs, you're also going to start to bring out the noise. And there's another reason why I'm saying, I would prefer a lower ISO when it comes to this stuff, because it means that I can add in structure and add in the strands of water without necessarily increasing the noise impact in the image, whereas in here we are bringing up noise. So it might be that we want to use more clarity, a little less structure because of that, that ISO choice. So Claudia said, interesting to see how you edit your own photos. Probably, sometimes they're a mess, I can tell you that. We'll do it. So maybe next session, we'll talk about when that will be. I'll pull up one of the images that either you guys haven't seen or one of the raws that I take in the next few days, and we'll edit it, no problem. And then JD's just said, suggestion for a shoot session, use of plugins such as Helicon Focus. JD, if you go back to, I think, either the second or third session we ever did, there's a whole section on Helicon Focus. From a thumbnail, it looks like a road that goes out to a mountain, I think in either Iceland or Canada or something like that. And we did a whole thing on focus stacking, how Capture One integrates with it. We can do it again by all means in future, but it's already there. You can watch that one there. And Mr. Grover's online. Good darts. And in the caravan. So it was not a caravan I stayed in last week. It was a private cabin that may have been moved in a mobile fashion. So there we go. Right. And Earl is just, yeah, send one in. So I will send a photo into me to edit. Not a problem. Right. So we've got our structure and our clarity loaded in, and again, this is all about compromise. So because I don't want to bring up too much noise, I don't want to push that structure too far, you can see what's going to happen if I do. You see all this noise coming up. Structure is doing its job. So just don't think this is a fault of structure. Structure is told to go and find textures and edges and enhance them. Well, ISO and noise is a texture, so that's what it's doing. So let's just dial that back a little bit. And all we're doing is we're looking to make sure that we've got a little bit more texture in this stuff. So you see it looks a bit more vivid, a little bit more vibrant, a little bit more rush as water comes by. Now we can also then use our high dynamic range and our white slider to pull back some more detail. Now here's the fun bit. This is an artistic decision because we can use our high dynamic range to try and soften and flatten the tone of the white water and bring back a lot of the detail. Great. Or we can use our high dynamic range to actually pull up some of the white in there and make it a little bit more vibrant still. So we go from there, which looks a little bit muddy now in comparison if you look at it, to this one, which looks a bit cleaner. So with that change, you can see that's before and that's after. All we've done is we've just made the water pop a little bit. Now there's one other final thing we can do with this, which is if I go to my color tab, which is the top left one here, the 3 circles, we can absolutely use our color editor to further change the feel of this water. So let's go to our color editor. I'm not going to use the basic one. I'm going to go to advanced, and the reason is because I want to choose this sort of muddy color in here. And it's going to give me a little arc by default. I'm going to stretch it because I know that it's not just that color I want to play with. It's plus or minus a little bit. So as we go down here on the tool, we can change that arc of color, so the muddy color that I clicked on, and we can, for a start, desaturate it, so we can saturate it up, and you can see everywhere else I hit the mask, or I can pull down the saturation. So let's do that, and we can pull up our lightness a little bit, just like that. We can even smooth down the variations in color between the two. So with that change done, we've then got even more of a difference between here, that muddy brown, quite murky now in comparison. You know, there's nothing wrong with it to start with, that's the first thing to say, but we've just made it look a little bit more vivid, a little bit more vibrant, a little bit more rushy, a bit more exciting. Okay, so that's our water. Really easy, that one. Now let's think about the framing and the rest of the texture in this shot. So what I could do with this shot is just a simple vignette if I really wanted to. Let's just see, there's lots of stuff going on here. So JD's asked about the Helicon Vega stuff. So yeah, Chili's saying I've been playing around with Capture One and Helicon Focus so far, and best results were to bring the images into Helicon with the raw in and out workflow, and then bring the result DNG into Capture One. So in general terms, just very briefly, because JD's just saying Helicon didn't work with Phase 1 raw files as it changed. So it doesn't load raw files. What you do is you have your raw files in Capture One, you export them as TIFFs into, where you actually right click and you edit in Helicon Focus. It comes as a, I don't think you can see on your screen the side that I want you to see, but effectively when you go to edit with, I get a thing up that says stack in Helicon Focus, so I can select all of my raw files, go to stack in Helicon Focus. It's then going to come up with a dialog box that says how do you want to export these images to use in Helicon. You'd select TIFF 16-bit and off you go. So it's not going to give you a raw file back. That's not what Helicon Focus is for. So you have to do your edits first in Capture One. Well, this is what I'd recommend anyway. Then bring them into Helicon. Let Helicon do all of the focus stacking and all of your masking and all that sort of stuff. When you're finished, you can absolutely send it back into Capture One as a DNG if you choose. My gut feel, though, is you should really have the adjustments done and down and settled before sending it into Helicon. To me, Helicon becomes the final step, not the first step. So get your adjustments done, get the images looking right, then send them into Helicon, do the stacking, and then you can round trip it back as one stacked TIFF file out of it. And then, where are we? Chili's just saying, I was talking about bypassing Capture One from the beginning. Yeah, start with Helicon, bring your raw images straight into Helicon, export as DNG. That's fine if you're happy with what Helicon does to your raw images. If you want Capture One to produce your raw images in a good way, then getting Helicon to do the initial raw conversion, then stacking it, then sending it into Capture One as a DNG, you're kind of starting off not from the pure raw state, you're starting off from what Helicon spits out. I absolutely would not do that. So I would personally suggest that you do your editing first, the raw editing in Capture One, export it out into Helicon as a stack, then bring that stack back in as a single image into Capture One. That's my view on it, but there we go. So Chili's saying found that the adjustments in Capture One got a lot of artifacts. Then that, I would imagine that's down to how it's been edited, if I'm honest. So if you're seeing artifacts and you're seeing, almost JPEG fragments and stuff like that, it's probably because one of your sliders has been overdone. You might have overdone HDR, you might have overdone something, but generally from my experience with it, Helicon is going to take exactly what it's given. I haven't seen that personally, but maybe it's on the type of image that we're editing. I'm not exactly sure. Okay, so that was Waterfall. Let's have a little play. So let's have a little look at what we're going to do with the toning of this. Now, I could, if I wanted to, just bring in a vignette. Now, that's not really going to do the job because a vignette, remember, is quite uniform. It's going to be all around the edges. It's going to be, darkened in every single corner. The central point of a vignette is always the literal center of the image. You've got the choice of saying it's circular on crop, circular or elliptical on crop, but the center of a vignette is always in the middle, and that's no good to us here. Instead, I want this to be the focus, and I might want this up here. So I've got a couple of ways of doing it. One is I could do it with a radial mask. So if I create a new layer, and we'll actually call it vignette. So if I create that layer as a radial mask, let's do that. Pull this in so it's nice and soft. So remember, the further away this line and this line are, the softer that fall off between 100% masked and 0% masked. The closer they are together, you're going to get more of a line, and actually you will see that physical line. if I do this as a result. So the nearer I pull it into the center, the softer that fall off is going to be, and that's what we're looking for, so no one notices that there's been a mask put over the top. Okay, so with that done, let's have a look at the mask itself. I'm going to place the mask down here, and I'm actually going to stretch it to be more vertical, less wide, just like that. And let's see what we can do. So with this, let's pull down our exposure a little bit. That's done quite a nice job. Okay. And what I'm also going to do is we're going to change our white balance a little bit just to be a touch warmer. Not much, but it just gives that real nice warm red color to those autumn colors. If we just bring the warmth up a little bit in Kelvin, so remember Kelvin goes blue to yellow effectively, so cold light to blue light, and tint goes from green to pink. Don't forget that the two kind of go hand in hand. If you push Kelvin too much from the actual base that you shot, you're going to find that the image starts to get a slightly green or pink tint to it. So you need to use the tint in unison with it. You can use your dropper, so you can click on there and choose what you want to be middle gray. But in this case, because I'm changing the white balance artificially, I'm intentionally changing it away from what it should be. Using the auto picker doesn't really make sense because that's going to always try and neutralize everything. So in general terms, if you're trying to get it completely accurate to middle gray, the standard daylight setting, and it is daylight when you're shooting, use the picker, choose an area that is gray, middle gray, and you're going to do well. If you're trying to change something artistically, the picker doesn't make sense because you're trying to override reality. So try not to use that one, try and do it by eye. The other thing just to bear in mind on top of all of that is, I said the nasty word there, we're trying to override reality. Don't overdo this. So if you're trying to change the picture and the feel of the picture, don't push it too far because then you are in the realms of it's unreal. Okay, so let's have a little addition to that. So there's our vignette. Let's just turn that on there. But what I've got now is this lot here is a bit too bright. So on top of our vignette, what I could do, here's a cool one. So let's go to my brush tool, B on the keyboard. And I can choose my brush size here. And I use opacity. I know David's now cringing. That's good. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on this mask layer here. This would happen automatically if I start brushing. But I'm going to tell Capture One proactively now, rasterize that mask. So I've used Capture One to create a soft vignette with a nice clear part in the middle. I want to rasterize it. In other words, I want to stop it being this editable shape, and I want it to start feeling like basically a TIFF, so a flat pixel-based mask. Having rasterized it, what that means is I can no longer edit that circle. This is now as if I'd painted it. But the great thing about as if I'd painted it is I can now paint some more. So even though I've used it to create a nice soft area, I can then add a little bit more into here and into here to soften that up. And if I didn't like the way that it falls up on the way out up towards the waterfall, I can go to my eraser and I can erase some of this mask up to here. So we now have a waterfall shaped mask, but because I started from a radial mask, we've got a lovely soft fall off, but it allows us to just erase the bits that are really important to me and keep those bright. So if I press M on the mask again, get rid of that. So this is now, oops, wrong slider. This is now a personal choice as to how much exposure you want to knock out from the rest of that mask. And again, it's keeping it real. So not too much, maybe, this is about 2/3 of the stop. That's pretty good. So to me, that sort of works. If I do, again, before and after, again, nothing wrong with the original image. All we've done is we've made it more golden, more autumnal in that sense. It's a good word. But we've also made the water pop. And that's all we're going to do with this shot. We don't need to do any more. We've got no sharpening issues down here. This is all nice and cool and detailed. I mean, we're at 250%, so I'm not too worried about this. We've got lovely texture in the water. The water's now popping. There's nothing more we need to do with that. And from the original, it's not far off. But you'll see it just feels a little bit different, a bit more warm, a bit more inviting. Okay. So let's have a little look at our next one from Miguel. Now, Miguel, you sent in the EIP, which actually is sometimes it's really useful to see the edits that you guys have. because it means that I can understand where you were trying to get to with the shot. So if you have edited a photo, let me see the EIP, and I'm going to be unfair a little bit on Miguel because we are going to go through those edits. Here's the raw file. Here's the edited version that you sent in, and I get it. But in my eye, and this is where it's down to your vision of the shot rather than mine, I'm going to end up editing this in a very different way because I feel that this doesn't quite fit. It doesn't quite fit. Few reasons. Number one, getting brighter out of the edges just seems a little bit strange. This glow here, so if I go into the layers, we've got about 9 layers on here. And I think one of them, can't remember, this one here, we've added some glow around the light. Not the worst thing to do, but it just feels a bit artificial in comparison to the rest of the shot. And these edges here, they just trying to find the it must be, ooh, no, it's just done in the background. The edges just feel like they've been overworked, and that's the problem in my head, that it's just a bit too overdone. So rather than starting from this point, and I get the toning, don't get me wrong, we just turn all these on. I get the toning you're going for, but the feel just feels a little bit out. And this is the original, so this is the raw file here. So first thing we're going to do with the raw file, before I do anything else, we're just going to heal out the couple of issues. So my healing brush here, I'm going to set 100% opacity, nice and soft edges. Heal brush is the one that looks like a band-aid up in the top. And as I start to draw, because I don't have any other layers, it's going to automatically create me a new healing layer. And it's going to choose, because we have the new healing layer tool, it's going to choose where to take it from, and it's got it pretty much right. That's good. Before, again, I talked about, I knew that it already had it in here, but remember to go into your lens calibration first. And in this case, I did actually forget to turn on diffraction correction at f18. We've probably got a little bit of softness creeping in towards the edges, so let's just turn that on. But in general, always go to the lens tab first. We're now in exposure. That heal layer there, that's fixed that hair that was on the lens by the look of it. And then I know in Miguel's shot we got rid of some of these, so absolutely let's just get rid of this little stone there, and it's going to choose a point. I'm going to override it and choose a slightly different point. Maybe down there, it's using that point for both. And then with this one, I think will probably come from here. Actually, no. So bear this in mind as well, just a little handy hint for healing brush. When you're healing on a picture that has different sharpnesses, try and choose an area that you're healing from on the same focal plane. So if that doesn't make sense, if I've got a shot that starts from near to me, slightly out of focus, midpoint in focus, in the distance maybe slightly out of focus again. If I choose a healing point from the area that's out of focus onto an area that's sharp, it doesn't make sense. When you look at it, Capture One's going to try and do its best, but it's taking blurry content to paste over sharp areas. So try and keep your areas that you're healing from on the same rough focal plane. If you're on, in this case, f18, it's not too much of an issue because basically the whole image is going to be roughly in focus. But you will find in other images, if you take it from the wrong area, the wrong origin, it's just going to look wrong when you look at it up close. And a lot of the reason is because it's been taken from an area that's maybe on a very different focal plane to the others. Let's just finish these off quickly. So you can see I'm moving the arrows to try and keep those arrows in the same rough area in the shot. So we've got rid of those bits down there. Okay, now this is where my output and Miguel's output are going to be very, very different. To me, the source of light in this shot is obviously the light itself. We don't have any other source of light. We don't have moonlight over here. We don't have a sunset over here. There's no artificial lights. There's no boats or anything. So it doesn't make sense that other light is coming into the frame. And that was the first thing I saw in here. Where is this light coming from on the sides? That doesn't make sense. This seems to be a bit too over HDR'd. We've actually ended up with some weird artifacts in here. Maybe from a bit too much clarity. I've seen that before. And this light in the center here with this extra little boost, it just doesn't quite add up. What adds up to me is probably, ironically, we talked about not doing it before, but something more like this. So I want to keep the tone, I want to keep the feel of the shot, but I want the light source to really come from there. Now that vignette's probably a little bit over the top in all the corners, so I'm going to use a little bit of vignetting, and then we're going to draw a radial mask. So we're going to call this one light post, new radial mask, and I'm going to draw it from exactly there. And I'm actually going to draw this weird sort of stretched circle shape. Just like before, we're going to really soften that down. So if I press M on the keyboard so you can see the mask, we're really softening that in. And actually I'm going to really bring that in a bit more too, to there. And then with this mask, I'm just going to pull in our exposure a bit more. Now you notice that rather than the vignette, which was pulling in the light into the middle of the frame, we still have a slight vignette, but this one isn't pulling the light into the middle of the frame, it's pulling the light into the top middle of the frame, which is where that post is. There's a few other things I just want to check before we go much further. So number one is to make sure it's level on the horizon. It looks pretty level, but this is your straighten tool. Click and hold on the horizon. These ones are easy to straighten when you can see the whole horizon. Let go. Yep, it's pretty much straight. You can do it vertically as well. And with that done, I'm then in the place of I can start playing with the overall background of the image. So all I've done so far is change some softening in the corners or some darkening in the corners with an overall vignette, and a specific darkening that leads the eye up to this light. But now what we have, as you can see, is a very dark image. So there's a few ways we can fix it. Of course, let's go to our background first. Remember, anything I do on that light post layer is only going to affect the light post layer, not the whole image. So where I want to affect the whole image now, we're going to our background layer. So I could do this with brightness. I can bring up the whole brightness of the whole image, okay? But the brightness slider, remember, it squashes rather than shifts the histogram. So you're going to end up with a slightly flattened effect. It's going to look a little bit dull, a little bit lacking in contrast. So we could use exposure. Okay, so we can see what happened on the histogram there on the left hand side. So we've literally taken the histogram and moved it to the right. Everything's got a bit brighter, great. But it's also pushed some of our shadows up a bit too much as well. So I want to use a bit of exposure correction, but the first thing I'm going to do, and we talked about this on Monday, if I want to stretch a histogram and keeping the shadows where they are, then that's what levels is for, and levels is our friend in this case. Okay, so let's have a little play with what we can do with our levels. Let me just turn on something just so you can see first, our exposure warning. So I know that this is overexposed. I could pull down my highlights and my whites and try and fix it, but I'm not going to. It's overexposed, it's overdone in the sensor. We're never going to change that. And you were shooting into a light, of course it's overexposed. It makes perfect sense. But what I'm getting at is, even with an increase of exposure, all I'm going to get is more of that overexposed. So in the case of levels, as I start to bring the levels down, it's going to start warning me, and we're going to start seeing it, that this overexposed area is getting a bit bigger. But I'm okay with that. From a view perspective, I'm actually not too fussed about it. So I'm going to pull down this level here. And let's just zoom out so you can see what's happening. So let's go back to where we were. Watch the histogram in the top left. So by pulling down this reference point on the right, what I'm telling Capture One to do is say anything that was 0 before, keep it at 0. So in other words, don't change the shadows. Anything that was 202 out of a scale of 255, so in other words, 80% bright. Anything that was that, now make it 255. So what we've effectively done is stretched the data in the histogram. We've pushed the data up towards the highlights. That's still not quite enough, so I'm now going to use our exposure on top of that by a lesser amount, just to do that final little pop. Now remember with our background, because I used the highlights and the whites, I've pulled back that area there as much as I can, and it's still overexposed. But I'm fine with that. A lot of people get really, really head up on this whole, oh, we've got an area that's overexposed. Sometimes I've even had people complain that the sun is overexposed when you're shooting directly into it and you have the starburst. It's a flying ball of gas that's on fire. It's creating, was it nuclear fission or fusion, whichever one it is. I think it's fusion, but either way, the thing, of course, is going to be overexposed if I shoot straight into it. And in this case, an overexposed single point of light in the middle of the shot with a nice starburst that's coming out of it, I have no problem with. So don't get too worried about things getting overexposed if they're a source of light. Where are we? Claudio, is there another way to level a photo? Sometimes I just want to go 1 or 2 degrees left and right, and using the leveler is not so accurate. Absolutely, yes, there is. Let's go into our lens tab up here. And down here, you have a rotation and flip section. And actually, that little thing here did a 0.05 change. So not only can you do it by 1 or 2 degrees, Claudio, you can actually do it by 0.01 degree at a time. And actually in here, we can, on there, we can use our slider and our scroller and so on to do it. But if you want to be really, really accurate, yes, you can type in an exact amount into there. So under the lens tab on the top left, go to rotation and flip. And whatever I do with our rotation tool, it's going to reflect it in there, or I can type in over the top and you get your accurate change. Okay, so here's our shot again, where we are. Let's go to our before and after. So there's our before, there's our after. This is feeling in my head a little bit better. We could cool it down a little bit more if we really wanted to. As I'm doing that, I'm starting to see a little bit of a green tint, so I'm just going to pull up that tint just a touch, not too much. We don't want it looking too pink, but you know, a little bit of change kind of helps. Let's just move that a touch back, maybe to, well, let me go. I'm just going to do what I said to Claudia. I'm going to type in 2.9. There we go, done. Okay, with all that done, I don't think there's much more that we need to add to this image. It looks like a nice print. And if I go from here to there, my gut feel just tells me this one's just a bit more of a powerful print to put on a wall than where we were before. If I create a new variant so we can see the raw side by side, so before and after is great, but let's just see them side by side. There's our raw. Here's the original edit, and this is where I would get to, but again, it's personal preference. If we want to go further with getting the idea to the person that the only source of light in this shot is here, what I could do is add another layer. I'm going to call it sky, and this time, rather than a radial, I'm going to add a linear gradient and just pull down that exposure a bit at the top, and another one called foreground. Now here's a cool one. Let's draw another linear gradient. I'm holding down the shift key on the keyboard to make it completely straight. With that done, I'm actually going to reduce a bit of saturation just to get this stone back to where it was, and pull down our exposure, not so much, a tiny bit, but let's just pull down that saturation there. So now we've got that neutral stone again. So we haven't gone to that. If I turn this off so you can see, yeah, let's just turn off the layer. So you see how everything went blue. So the sea went blue for sure, no problem there, but so did the stone. And this way it's not quite so pronounced. And the further, again, same thing with the mask, the further and further up that mask goes, the softer that fall off is. So you're not going to see any change in color as it goes. So to me, I'd sort of get from there against there. And it's, of course, in all of these things, this is my view. It doesn't necessarily mean it's the right view, but to me, that feels like it should feel. This one here, I think it's just been too much added to it. It's just too bright. And these light sources on the side really don't make sense to me. This one does in the middle, but I'm tempted not to add it because I just like the way that light sits on its own with a little star. Okay, so there's that one. Someone's, Claudia, so how about warming the photo a little bit? We can. So if I go back to my background, well, I've got two ways, but let's do it the other way. So I'm going to create a filled adjustment layer, and we'll call this layer warming. So with our warming layer, remember a filled layer, if I press the M button so you can see, has everything in the picture masked. So everything below it is now affected. I could change it on the background layer, but logically it just feels a bit better to have this final layer over the top that we can tweak, and I can always turn it off. So if I want to warm the whole image up a little bit, I can. We get to sort of there. It starts to lose a little bit of the feel to it though. So this feels cold. This one feels more natural for sure, but maybe it's a little too natural. Sounds a bit weird. But the advantage of doing this on a layer is once I've done that, rather than tweaking the white balance itself, I can tweak the opacity of it. So in other words, 100% of that change, 0% of that change, or anything in between. So I could say, actually, I do like it, but not so much. So maybe only a third of it. Oh, yeah, there we go. And we get to a pretty good place. So that's where I'd end it. There's our original. There's our finished shot. If I do our little windscreen wiper before and after. So all we've done, we've removed some stuff in here with healing brushes. We've added an overall vignette around the image just to bring the focus into the center, but not very much. Then we've added a specific radial mask down into this light. And then we've darkened and removed some of the blue tint from the stone with a gradient layer at the bottom, and the same from the top, and it just keeps the focus on that one up there. Okay, right. Next up, Bart's image of a bird. Robin? Yeah, I think so. Right, good example of a lens here. So the lens it was shot with is a 70 to 200 2.8 something. Normally it give us the manufacturer of the lens, but there we go. Okay, so for whatever reason we don't have our lens loaded in here. The temptation some people will have is to go into here and just pick a random one that says 70 to 200 2.8. All these lenses behave slightly differently. They are profiled exactly as they're intended to be by the guys in Capture One. So if you don't have a lens profile of a lens that you're using and you know it's a popular lens, send an email in, or actually the support request. So go support.capture1.com, put in the request to have that lens profiled. If enough people ask for that lens to be profiled, you'll get it. I have this issue actually at the moment, so I've been playing with a Canon 15 to 35 RF lens, and unfortunately it's not in the list of Canon lenses. So since David's on, but actually good case in point, I can tell David until my face goes red. It doesn't make a difference unless the call is logged into the support system with Capture One. So if you're missing a lens, support.capture1.com and put in the request for your lens profile. If you don't have it in the meantime, stick with generic. Try not to just pick a random lens. It doesn't make much sense. At 280mm, let's have a little look. This is one that we're going to talk about in a second in terms of shutter speed and stuff. So I don't think chromatic aberration is going to do much for us in this image. We're not going to get much out of diffraction correction, and the purple fringing isn't going to happen because everywhere that's a high contrast point is out of focus anyway, and it's thrown it. So first thing we're going to talk about, and as a bit of a disclaimer who was it sent it in? Sorry. Oh, it's Bart. Okay. Bit of a disclaimer for Bart. I know the challenge of shooting wildlife, and it's always a bit of a seesaw between ISO and shutter speed and the aperture of your lens. However, this image isn't sharp, and it's not sharp in any place. So it's not about the focus is out. It's about the fact that possibly this was handheld. I'm not sure, but general rule, and you know, this is one of the original sort of math things with it. Double your focal length for the speed that you're trying to shoot. All these cameras now that have 300 stops of image stabilization and blah blah blah, I've still not seen one perform to a point where it can overcome handheld shake or even motion when we're trying to capture something that's moving or tracking and so on. So at 280mm, I'd have expected to see this at a 500th of a second or faster. This is at 125th. So in general terms, I'm not surprised this is slightly out of focus. When I say out of focus, it's not a focus issue from what I can see, it's a movement issue. And even things like the shutter, it's a D800, so it has a shutter. Even things like the shutter mechanism going up and down at this sort of focal length, you can see shutter shake and so on in the shot. So I would have personally sacrificed, if this is a 2.8 lens, you've got another stop in your lens, that would have got you to a 250th of a second, and I would have been tempted to even put it up to ISO 800 and be slightly underexposed. At 800 and a 500th of a second, at f2.8, I think you would have ended up with a sharper image. But this is where we're at, and this little guy here, we need to do what we can to bring it over. So let's see what we can do. First off, let's go to our exposure tab. Now, we've got to think about our framing of this. At the moment, he's sat right in the middle of the shot. I don't have a problem, don't get me wrong, I don't have a problem with anything sat right in the middle of the shot, but I am tempted on this one just to pull him in a little bit here. just to keep the interest leading up to him. So this log is a great choice, putting it in there as part of the frame. But all this stuff out here, if you were shooting for a wild, and this is one other thing to bear in mind, if you're shooting for magazines or something like that, remember they need dead copy space. So they need areas where they can put text over the top. If you're not, and it's a print or it's wallpaper or whatever, then you don't need to worry about that too much. So we can come in a bit tighter on here. With that in, now we can start to think about how we're going to deal with the cropping and everything of this shot. Now, here's a fun one. I don't know whether these trees were straight. They probably weren't. Trees don't tend to be completely vertical. However, you see now we're cropped in, we've now got this issue where it feels like we're leaning simply because of those lines. So even though the trees may have been vertical, we have to now deal with the fact that visually they look a little off. So, and in fact, I know they're not vertical because look at these two, they're completely different angles. But we can use our keystone tool to fix that. So I'm going to pull one line of the keystone tool over here to match that tree. I'm not worried about this tree out in the distance. It's not going to be in my crop. This one here, let's pull this line along the center of this branch or this tree trunk here. Hit apply. Okay. We now have, well, actually a bit too much. Funnily enough, we normally have to do a bit more because of the 80% rule on a keystone, but that's done it a bit better there. Okay. We now have straight lines, and the key is with these straight line things, the nearer you are to the edge of the image, the more pronounced any angle looks. So if we had a load of the background that was all different lines and so on, it's not going to be an issue. But where we've only got a couple of things in here that are very pronounced vertical lines, they need to feel vertical to the viewer, otherwise it just feels uncomfortable. So as a result of that crop and getting the focus in here, it means that these two things become really important. Use the keystone tool to fix it. The keystone tool I've used in isolation to, or in comparison to the rotate tool, because those trees were at different angles. If I use the rotate tool, well, I fix this tree, but I also have this tree wrong as well. The keystone tool allows me to have different angles effectively on one side of the frame to the other side of the frame. So that's why we're using the vertical keystone tool to pull those trees straight without affecting the other one on the other side of the frame. So there's our new crop. That looks pretty nice. We've got a couple of things that we can do to try and bring out the detail in this guy here. So first off, we're being unfair. We're at 200% here. At 100%, it looks perfectly fine, but we can still get it a little bit better. So first off, let's use a touch of clarity. Bear in mind, clarity is dealing with areas. So yes, we're going to pull up some of this information here, but we're also going to be affecting the bokeh in the background. So be careful with that. Structure. This is where we talked about texture and edges. So texture and edges are fantastic ways of bringing up perceived sharpness. And I'm using that word very, very carefully, perceived sharpness. If an image is not sharp, you cannot sharpen it. Claudia, we need to have words. Topaz Sharpener AI might be able to help in this case. Do not use Topaz Sharpener AI. It's an awful piece of software, in my opinion, of course. The reason that I say that, however, whenever I've ran an image through their so-called AI, it's not AI. If it was AI, you'd never have to update the software because it would be intelligent enough to know what it needs to change and do it for you, but whole different rabbit hole. So Topaz Sharpener does a good job at rescuing images if you're not worried about the end image quality, and I say that very seriously. Every single test I've put through it, and I've been playing with the Topaz Labs stuff for, well, yeah, literally a decade plus, I think even maybe, from the initial set that used to get this little package on CD and whatever else. Every version, I have it, I've bought it, I play with it to see how it's doing. It has really, really, really let me down in terms of the quality of the image that comes out of it. Yes, it will give you the perception of sharpening it, but look closely, and you're going to see. Who was it? I think it was Chili Cayenne saying earlier about artifacts when it went into had it gone focus. It's the artifacts that these AI programs add in that actually, when you print, and I would encourage anyone that's used that tool, print the image and see the actual quality of the image, and it's degraded. Pure and simple. So be really careful with those tools. If you have a tool that says, hey, with absolutely one or no effort on your part, one button click is going to make your picture perfect, it's not. It's a lie. And I'm sorry that there are a few pieces of junk software out there on my list, and unfortunately, in my head, that's one of them. There we go. That's a very opinionated little round there, but there we go. So instead, what I would prefer to see in here is a little bit more sharpening, but I can localize that sharpening. So remember, at the moment, we're doing these structure and sharpening changes on the whole image. Let me just undo temporarily and redo. So it's made the bird a lot better, but it's also brought out a bit of noise in the background. Well, we have a noise reduction function in here. Let's just bring up a bit more noise luminance reduction. Yeah, that helps a little bit, but then unfortunately with noise and sharpening there's always a balancing act, because noise effectively is reduced by blurring. That's the reality. And then sharpening is made enhanced by making textures and edges crisp, which effectively is noise. So what we can do instead is we can choose the bird selectively and improve the sharpening on this subject rather than the whole of the image. So we don't want noise in the background, but we're happy with some of it in here because actually the noise will be perceived as texture in the feathers. So let's draw a little mask, and we're going to call this mask Sharpening Detail. And with my mask here, I'm going to be pretty rough. I can't really use a luma range. You'll see why in a minute. Some of this bird here is the same luma range effectively as the background. So we're going to have to do it a little bit handheld, but 100% opacity, 100% flow, and turn my mask on. So press M so we can see, and we're just going to do this and try and avoid going outside the edge of the bird. The reason is we don't want those halos to appear around the edges. Now, one thing that you will see, well, you can't see, but I can tell you what I'm doing. Typically, when I'm editing, I have my right hand on mouse / tablet / whatever you choose to use, and my left hand on the keys for make bigger and make smaller. So you can get a lot more efficient if you're able to keep going on the fly, bigger, smaller, without having to constantly right click or look down at the keyboard. So let's just go there. I'm just going to do this one. I'm doing it a little bit roughly here. Press E for the erase brush, and we can switch between eraser and brush. B for brush again, and we go here. I'm not going to bore you by doing the whole lot, so we're going to do some of this roughly, but you get the idea. We try and stay as much as we can inside these areas. We don't really need to sharpen the edges on this one. It's the texture I want to pull out. So that there. And if I can't be bothered to paint the rest of it inside, or even get a bigger brush, I can, having closed that loop, right click, go to fill mask, and it will fill the rest of it for me. Turn my mask off. Let's have a little look at our bird. And with this mask, the sharpening detail mask, I can add some extra sharpening, not too much. Again, it's all about doing it in moderation. Add some clarity and add a bit of structure. And if I go off to on, we've now got that bird a lot sharper, a lot more crisp, without having to increase the noise in the background. So we go from before to after. We can see the difference is quite bold, but we haven't added in all that extra noise in the background as a result of just using clarity and structure on the whole image. Okay, we can actually pump the clarity on the bird a little bit more, and the tree, so we can see the difference in the tree as well. So it goes from being quite soft to being quite high contrast. That was pretty nice. Other ways of pulling in the focus into the bird, well, we could, let's just pull in a little, I'm going to call it left hand grad. So I'm just going to pull in a soft gradient in here, really small adjustment, like there you go, 1/3 of a stop, that's it. I'm going to put in another one called top grad, and you can guess where this one's going to go. Slight lean to the right, I'm following that light line effectively down there. I'm going to pull in our exposure there, that looks pretty good. Overall with our background, we could afford a little bit of level pop just to bring out a bit of highlight. And then this is going to sound weird. By pulling that level pop in, I've effectively pulled the bits here up. So we've got brighter, got more contrasty, but we've also then maybe overexposed some of the highlights. So even though I've pulled the levels up, I'm actually going to pull our highlights and our whites down a little bit so we don't overexpose anything. And that's it for me, from my perspective. So we go from there to there. If we want to, we can of course do our extra little layer. I'm just going to go fill mask, and we'll call this one warmth, just like we did before. So we could warm up the scene. Ugh, don't really like that. We could cool down the scene. Okay. Or we can just leave it exactly as it was, which actually was probably the right tone. You could tweak it a little bit if you wanted to, but actually it's not far off to start with. But what we do have for sure is a very big difference between this original shot and our final shot there, mostly down to the crop and the rotate, not necessarily down to much of the editing. All we've done in the editing is try and rescue some of the detail in this little guy here without putting up too many artifacts in the background. Okay, JD's just asked, how do I really feel? One thing I am, in fairness, is very transparent with my views, especially on certain pieces of software, but there we go. So, would it be worthwhile to master the bird and tree stump on its own for clarity and structure? Yes, it would, Chili Guyan, which is exactly why I did it just then. So, yeah, sorry, I missed that comment just before, but yes, absolutely, that's what we've done. So I was saying I appreciate your honesty. Yeah, sorry. I don't think I'm going to get sponsored by Topaz anytime soon. Jet Online. Hi, Jet. What do we do with something in the white point in the background? So, Pablo, that's sort of where I'm at. If we chose the white, let me just create a new clone of this variant. If we did the picker, so let's go to the background here and choose the picker and say, well, okay, what should be relatively neutral? Probably this light source here. And choose that. We're not going to get much different to what the camera saw. In fact, we're of course overriding it as well a little bit with that one over the top. But if I choose, let's go to our background, choose in the white, yeah, it gets very, very green there. If I choose somewhere else, maybe that's a bit better, a bit more neutral. But we're just playing around. So as a result of always just playing around, typically what I find is doing it manually with a separate layer for your white balance is always going to be a bit more flexible for what you want to do. Okay, so we have a few minutes left. I'm going to come back probably next week to this one and Alf's one as well. So this one's another example. So 55 millimeters, 60th of a second. Funnily enough, this shot doesn't actually have a problem too much with movement in the camera. What it does have an issue with is this guy moving quite a lot. So we'll try and see what we can do with that one next time. But for today, so we've got Happy Waterfall from Earl. Again, so if we go before and after, very small changes in this, but it just feels more warm or more inviting as a result. The only thing, just seeing it now, I'd be tempted to do, personal choice again, is let's create a new little heel there and maybe get rid of this boy down here. There we go. It's not really a problem. It's just I've just noticed the distraction when we go there, and when you print that, I'm always thinking about how would it look when it's printed. Having something right on the edge of the frame like that can be a little bit distracting, so that's a bit cleaner there. Okay, Miguel's shot. So my view on it is very different. Miguel, that you are absolutely, if that's how you feel with that image, that's how you remember that image feeling, then stick with it. It's just, to me, that would be more something that I could put onto a wall in a room somewhere. Maybe be a little bit calmer in that sense. And then Bart's shot. So the Robin, we've done a bit of rescuing in terms of the sharpness and recrop. Changed a bit of the white balance, but selective sharpening. Don't do the whole image because you're going to end up with a lot of noise coming out in the background. So, few on, where are we? So before we finish off, Love Question various edits, statement about 90% complete. What should you take one of my images to 100%? Yeah, well, okay, we're going to do that. Okay, and Pablo, there's like an army of you all on about, right, let's see, editing some of them. So next time we will do one of my images. Jeff's actually said spend a full hour once a month using one of my images. To be honest, if I am honest, we're talking about half an hour, realistically. So some of the shots that I do take a little bit more time. Typically, that's where we need to remove stuff, or especially if we're doing commercial stuff. If you're ever doing stuff for things like hotels or destinations, things like chips in paintwork and all that sort of stuff, that's where the time is taken. But in terms of landscapes, the general rule is you captured what was there. There's not much you can do with it other than, take Earl's shot, for example. We might want to remove a distracting leaf down the bottom, but that's kind of it. And then the rest of it's color. So we'll do it. We'll do that next time. So where are we? Actually, Kyan, do I print from Capture One? No, I print from Photoshop. Sorry. So I can print from Capture One. I can print directly out of Capture One. But if I'm doing something that's a specific layout or something like that, or onto the image, what we'll do is we'll load the TIFF, put it into, well, actually, do I print from Capture One? Yes, I do, actually, is the answer. But I also print from Photoshop, depending on what we're trying to do. But either way, you can get a very similar result. Okay, so that's it for today. Next week, I am out shooting again. Sorry, boys and girls. So as a result, it means that we're going to have to do the same shift that we did last time. Really sorry about that. It means that we're going to have our next session on Monday, let me just check, 26th. So that's not next week. Next week you get a week off of class. No homework either. That's cool. But Monday the 26th will be the next session that we do. In the meantime, check out that Facebook group. A lot of the stuff that we talked about today we will cover in that group as well. If anyone's got any questions in it, we can answer those. You can put your images in there in the meantime. But we will convene effectively same time, 3 o'clock, but a week on Monday the 26th. And I will use one of the shots, hopefully, that we take next week, and we'll edit it through from start to finish. No worries in that. In the meantime, you've obviously got access to all of the rest of the stuff on YouTube. So you've also got those 20-30 minute tuition things. So the little specific subjects on whether it's before and after tools or healing and clarity and so on. Remember to upload your raw files. Remember to include your name. Again, please tell us what your name is before we get the file. But upload your file into there. We need the raw, not a TIFF, not a JPEG. We'll edit them together. And from the rest of things for the rest of the week, that's going to be it. If you need to get in touch with me or each other, then use the Facebook group. Use those methods that are all on the screen. And failing that, we will see you in about 10 days' time, next Monday, so the 26th of October, and stay safe between now and then.